Imagine a situation where, over 80 years ago, an individual in a profound trance-like state foresaw a personality now central to global discourse. He meticulously described a chain of occurrences that unsettlingly mirror what people are confronting in 2026. Initially, this might seem implausible, merely another instance of attributing significance to sheer coincidence. However, a deeper examination of this account brings to light increasingly unsettling details. The person behind these proclamations was no ordinary fortune teller attempting to predict the future. This was Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, who delivered thousands of documented psychic insights. In one of his most enigmatic readings from 1941, Cayce described a specific leader destined to appear. "I envision a man whose hair is like the gold of the sun," Cayce uttered deliberately. "He shall arrive when a mighty country is fractured from within." He predicted this individual would not be a traditional monarch, yet would wield the sway of one. Most importantly, he claimed this man would serve as a mirror, revealing the inner nature of the populace. As we navigate the chaos of 2026, where names ignite fervent debates and fracture households, Cayce's mid-2020s pivot point feels undeniably present. But before we unravel this riddle of history and foresight, let us look at the man himself. Edgar Cayce was hardly the type of person one would expect to become the focus of such extensive research. Originating from a serene Kentucky farm in 1877, Cayce lived an unpretentious life. He pursued a profession as a photographer, was a devoted churchgoer, and was recognized as a humble and deeply pious individual. There was no early indication that he would one day be known as the sleeping prophet. In fact, ordinary events that defined his life began with what initially appeared to be a disaster rather than a miracle. At the age of 21, Cayce abruptly lost his voice due to an inexplicable illness. Physicians investigated his condition and exhausted every conceivable treatment, yet all their efforts proved fruitless. His capacity to speak had entirely vanished. For someone whose occupation demanded daily interaction, this was devastating. Ultimately, having exhausted all conventional medical approaches, a local hypnotist proposed an unconventional notion. He theorized that Cayce might be able to enter a hypnotic state, allowing his own consciousness to pinpoint the cause. The subsequent occurrences astonished everyone present. Cayce's breathing diminished, settling into a slumber-like condition. He then began to speak, but the voice that emerged bore no resemblance to the photographer known to all. Instead, it was composed, confident, and remarkably authoritative. While in this altered state, Cayce precisely articulated the physiological problem and recommended a specific treatment. The instructions were followed, and by the following day, Cayce's vocal ability was entirely restored. Gradually, these records expanded into a collection exceeding 14,000 authenticated trance encounters. This was only the beginning. Throughout these altered states, Cayce claimed that he was accessing what he referred to as the Akashic Records, a kind of universal archive, a cosmic expanse of information encompassing the chronicle of every spirit and potentiality. Initially hesitant to offer prognostications regarding the future, the visions began to manifest regardless. Decades before the world plunged into the chaos of World War II, Cayce warned about an impending global conflict. In the 1930s, when such an idea appeared almost inconceivable, he discussed Japan initiating hostilities. While many dismissed this as impossible, the attack on Pearl Harbor later demonstrated the uncanny precision of his foresight. He foretold the financial collapse of 1929 that would precipitate the Great Depression, and alluded to the eventual dissolution of the Soviet Union many decades before its occurrence. But perhaps most captivating were his archaeological insights. Cayce referenced concealed chambers beneath the Great Sphinx, housing archives from a long-lost civilization. For years, Egyptologists scoffed. Nevertheless, decades later, ground-penetrating radar uncovered anomalous formations, reigniting discussions about potential hidden artifacts beneath the desert. Whether it was the movements of nations or the secrets buried beneath the sand, Cayce's sleeping mind seemed to see through the veil of time itself. Long before cellular phones existed, Cayce depicted something he referred to as a light box, envisioning it as a fundamental part of daily existence. He claimed individuals would transport these gadgets universally, continuously soaking up data from them. These instruments would shape how people reasoned, how they interpreted actuality, and even how they engaged with one another. Back then, the depiction seemed fantastical. Currently, it presents as an uncannily accurate portrayal of today's smartphones. Cayce cautioned that these innovations held immense promise to disseminate information immediately and forge connections. Yet he simultaneously advised that these very technologies might evolve into potent instruments for diversion and influence. Details would circulate with such velocity that discerning veracity would prove challenging. Sentimental responses would proliferate more rapidly than considered deliberation. Observing the present state of social media, sophisticated deepfake tools, and curated news feeds, Cayce's premonition appears considerably less theoretical. Mankind now inhabits an informational ecosystem unlike any previous era. Daily, countless voices vie for recognition. Some convey profound understanding, others propagate falsehoods, interwoven so artfully that distinguishing fact from fabrication becomes the ultimate trial. Cayce held that this bewilderment was no mere chance occurrence. It functioned as an examination of autonomous thought. As the incessant clamor grows unbearable, the search for stability begins to turn inward. For Cayce, the internal transformation of humanity was always mirrored by the external world. He characterized the span leading into the mid-2020s as the age of purification, a period of intense planetary feedback. The initial omen he cited pertained to the heavens. He foretold an epoch when peculiar occurrences would manifest above Earth, phenomena that even the most sophisticated scientific intellects would find perplexing. Luminous manifestations, unidentified objects, and atmospheric irregularities that would question our grasp of the cosmos. Presently, in 2026, governments worldwide openly admit to encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena. Military aviators recount objects maneuvering in ways that defy established physical laws. A mere happenstance? Perhaps. However, the subsequent harbinger Cayce delineated may be even more remarkable. He discussed the planet itself growing more agitated. Seismic events would strike regions that had remained stable for centuries. Inactive volcanoes would awaken. Cayce asserted this was not merely random geological activity. He held that Earth was a living entity linked to awareness. When humanity experiences profound upheaval, the planet mirrors that disturbance. Patterns of ground tremors grow progressively less foreseeable as we approach the critical pivot point. We are no longer just watching history, we are feeling the planet itself respond to the shift in our collective spirit. Following the portents in nature came the third omen. Cayce prophesied that a potent resurgence in the East would contend with Western supremacy. Simultaneously, he foresaw advanced technologies possessing the capacity to unify humankind or subject it to unparalleled surveillance. In the early 20th century, when Cayce uttered these statements, computers were non-existent. Artificial intelligence remained confined to the realm of speculative fiction. Yet presently, in 2026, humanity finds itself at that juncture. Artificial intelligence can now generate convincing realities that never transpired. Algorithms influence the perceptions and convictions of billions. Such instruments hold the promise of resolving issues once deemed insurmountable, from disease to energy scarcity. However, they also provoke disquieting inquiries. Who governs these sophisticated systems? Cayce was convinced this eruption of technology would compel humanity to make a collective decision. A choice between enlightened consciousness and pervasive regulation. He cautioned about one additional harbinger, a cohort of young people immersed in such a deluge of data, that discerning authenticity from deception would become extraordinarily challenging. Within such surroundings, individuals would frantically seek assurance, gravitating toward figures asserting complete knowledge. These figures would amass substantial adherents, but Cayce stressed the intent was not to ensnare, but to propel humanity toward an introspective search for truth. This brings us back to the most enigmatic part of Cayce's 1941 reading, The Man with Sun-Golden Hair. In the mid-2020s, the powerful public response centered around such a personality isn't truly about the person himself. In Cayce's view, the leader serves as a mirror. This concept aligns with Jungian psychology, the idea of the shadow. The shadow embodies aspects of ourselves we prefer to ignore, our anxieties, frustrations, and unresolved feelings. When these are cast onto public figures, they provoke exceedingly powerful responses. The polarizing figure in our contemporary era acts as a catalyst, a reflective surface exposing sentiments latent within society. What people perceive in him reveals what resides within their own inner beings. This explains the extreme division we witness in 2026. Political disagreements permeating family gatherings, social platforms amplifying every dispute, and nations trapped in spirals of suspicion. As per Cayce, the responses people experience towards him divulge more about themselves than about the man in question. The dramatic theatrics of this era are merely the superficial manifestation of a grander spiritual evolution. The Golden Leader was never intended to be the central focus. He is the catalyst compelling humanity toward change. For a novel way of thinking to materialize, existing frameworks must first disintegrate. The fragmentation and the disarray are the impetus forcing humanity to face its shared shadow. We are at a critical juncture where we must choose: continue the fragmentation or begin the collective awakening. Despite all the upheaval he detailed, Cayce did not anticipate humanity's trajectory leading to ruin. On the contrary, he was convinced that this turbulence was propelling us toward what he termed a second awakening. In this emerging stage, technology and spiritual insight would commence operating in harmony. Scientific breakthroughs would broaden our grasp of sentience, and energy innovations would diminish our footprint. Crucially, people would start perceiving themselves not as inhabitants of distinct countries, but as one human family. Cayce affirmed that every instrument required to forge this novel world is already at hand. The real question goes whether a prediction will come true. The inquiry becomes personal. What role will you take on? Will you feed into the patterns of worry and separation that capture the noise of the day? Or will you participate in the awakening Cayce was certain could happen? Because, as the sleeping prophet asserted, the future is never fixed. It is continually shaped by our shared consciousness and the everyday choices we make. Transformation never starts in legislative bodies or broadcasting centers. It begins subtly within you. We find ourselves in a time when the choices made by individuals hold the power to shape civilization's path. In 2026, the mirror is held up to all of us. What will you choose to see? And more importantly, who will you choose to become?